So here we are at Holy Saturday. It's a day that is ambivalent for many churches today. On the one hand, it's part of the Paschal Triduum, the 3 days that are historically considered to be the most important ones of Holy Week. That is Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday. On the other hand, many churches seem to regard it as a kind of day off in between the great activity of services for Holy Week and the anticipation of the celebration to come tomorrow as we think about the resurrection and celebrate it. I suspect that one of the reasons for this is that it doesn't feature in the narratives of the Gospels. There isn't a passage of the Bible that we can read today to illustrate what I'm going to say. To be sure, there are a couple of references, one of them in Ephesians and one of them in 1 Peter, which in the early centuries gave rise to the notion that during this period Jesus was still active. He was, to use the terminology, harrowing hell. In other words, he was doing something in the underworld to, I guess, share the good news with those who were imprisoned there. A notion that even finds its way into some of the creeds. I suppose I could spend some time talking about all that today, but I'm not going to, because it takes me into all sorts of theological rabbit holes that I'm not sure how useful they are, for one thing, and certainly would take us well beyond the intention of these short videos that I've been making for this week. Instead, I want to reflect on my experience of the celebration of Holy Saturday, because for many churches, it's become a day of community activity within the church building, cleaning the building, clearing stuff out, meeting with all ages, building a resurrection garden in time for the celebrations of Easter Day, which are to come. In other words, it's become a time of affirming one of the key things that we say was accomplished through the actions of Jesus on that first Easter, namely the establishment of community, a community that incorporates and involves people of all ages and all kinds in all times and all places. I'm reflecting on my own experience of Holy Saturdays doing that sort of thing, cleaning out the church building, making it ready for the celebration of the next day, and particularly building the Easter garden, which of course is an all-age activity. Because when we do that, we don't just build an Easter garden, we have conversation along the line as we're doing it. We talk with those of different generations who might be reflecting on their own experiences of Easter in the past, in the process sharing the story that we have all encountered and journeyed with during the remainder of this week. It's become for many congregations a great time of, therefore, we might say, Christian education, if you like. In fact, as I reflect on the slightly messy nature of messing around with stones and soil and plants to create a miniature Easter garden, I wonder if it was perhaps the forerunner or the inspiration of what today in other circles would be a regular experience of messy church. It can certainly be messy, but can also be church, because actually the creation of a community of God's people focused around the stories of Jesus and exploring their experience of Jesus and the coming of the Christ into our own lives has become really quite a significant thing when these activities are done with intentionality. But then, of course, moving on from what might typically be happening in many congregations, even as I speak, we come to the Great Easter Vigil, which typically and traditionally takes place either after dark on this night or very early in the morning on Easter Day, where we gather outside the church and light a bonfire. And the bonfire, of course, is not just to keep us warm or lightened up because it's like going to be dark outside. The bonfire is to celebrate not just the community which Christ has enabled, but also the light that Christ, death and resurrection, has brought into the world more generally. And this is not only a reminder of some key aspects of our faith, but actually can be significantly a missional experience. Now, of course, I know that in the way many of our church buildings are located, it's not so easy to have a bonfire. If you're right on the pavement or in the middle of shops, for example, you're probably not going to have a bonfire as such, though you might manage to have a small brazier with some flame in it. But I do recall one experience, one occasion, when this became significantly missional. And it was in a church where there was plenty of space round about the church building with garden and so on, and car park and what have you. And we were out there at, I guess, probably about 10 o'clock on this night. It certainly was dark, and we had had some preparatory prayer in the church before we processed outside to light the bonfire. And we were standing there round the bonfire, reflecting on the Easter story, reflecting on what we were hoping for, expecting, anticipating the next day with the coming of Christ once again to us in our situation. And we were joined by a significant number of other people. It was quite easy for them to join us because we were outside, for one thing. So they didn't have to navigate doors and pews and all the rest of it to come and join us. But significantly, perhaps, the church was located on a main route, really, that people would be walking home, having been to the pub or whatever else they'd been on this evening, back to their homes. We did the things that the liturgical season expected us to do. We then lit the Paschal candle from the bonfire, a manoeuvre which takes a good deal of dexterity if you've never done it before, and there are multiple ways of accomplishing it. And then we processed, I guess would be the right ecclesial word, we processed into the church building, following the flame, the new light of Christ living amongst us, back into the church sanctuary. And I shall never forget that once we got inside, we discovered, was pretty obvious actually, that more people had come in to join us than those of us who went out to light the bonfire in the first instance. These people who came in to join us were bolder than most of our congregation would have been, because one or two of them started talking to each other and saying, "How have we ended up here in church? I thought we were just walking home. How did we get in here? Why are we here anyway?" Which became a cue for me to say to the congregation, well, you've been praying for people with whom to share the good news of Jesus. Now's your opportunity. And to be fair to them, they rose to that opportunity really well. And suddenly there was a buzz as people were sharing with those who'd come in from outside, unexpectedly, unintentionally, sharing not just the Easter story, not just their own story, but the whole story of the Christian gospel. So I've been thinking, I wonder if those churches which have not known what to do with Holy Saturday, maybe it would be a good idea if we rediscovered that heritage, not just as yet another thing to do during Holy Week, but actually as part of our mission in sharing the good news of Jesus with our communities. I don't think you need to have a specially visionary view of mission to see that a bunch of people with a bonfire outside a church building in the middle of the night, or at least when it's dark, are going to attract other people to wonder what's going on. And that's the best start for mission. When people start saying, what is this about? When people come to us with their questions, rather than us going to them with our answers, which of course quite often are not answers to the questions that anybody might be asking. So community building, mission, those are the two themes that I would take out of Holy Saturday for those church traditions that are unsure about the theological background to it all. Mind you, there is something to be talked about in that regard, because I think that the gospel writers say nothing about Holy Saturday because they truly and absolutely believed that Jesus was dead. Not that he was doing stuff somewhere else, but actually for them that was the end of the story, except we know it wasn't. And looking back with hindsight is a wonderful thing, which is why we'll have a wonderful celebration when we come together tomorrow to reflect on the final day of Holy Week. Well, actually, it's not the final day of Holy Week, it's the first day of the rest of our lives. But there's something to think about. If Holy Saturday has never meant anything much to you or your tradition, there's something that we might learn from it, because it is indeed, in different ways, part of that great Paschal Triduum of Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and now Holy Saturday. I hope that these reflections have blessed you this Holy Week, and I pray that you will have a truly celebratory experience of the risen Christ working in your life, in your congregation, wherever you might be, tomorrow and in all the days that follow. Thanks for being here, and my prayers for whatever church you belong to, wherever you find yourself, whatever church you don't belong to, as you continue your spiritual journey.